This video is brought to you by patreon.com/worsttake. Get access to exclusive live streams and Discord servers, on-screen shoutouts, and early access to some videos when you join now. Help make sure that we can continue to make content like this by supporting the Patreon. Links are in the description down below. Hey, what's up and welcome to Q&A, the show where I take your questions from YouTube and answer them here in video format. There's a ton to get into, so let's just jump into it. First question today is from Ian, and Ian's question says, hey Q, now that Goodwin will be unavailable due to his unfortunate medical situation, do you think a guy like Anthony Schwartz will manage to stick with the 53-man roster now that he's the fastest wide receiver? Well, there was a question, and I think a really legitimate question, of whether Anthony Schwartz was going to make the roster, even before Marquise Goodwin's injury situation. Now, again, I'm not familiar with the specific type of blood clots that Marquise Goodwin has. I know that, you have to go through some kind of therapy to be able to clear out the clots. And as somebody who's had blood clots before, like that could take a number of times that you can't really put on the calendar, right? So with his situation being virtually unknown for the next couple months to half a year to even over a year, yeah, I think this does open up a spot for Anthony Schwartz. I think the spot that it opens up more is Jakeem Grant. I thought there was a possibility that the Browns would keep 7 wide receivers. Now they can just keep 6, and Jakeem would be part of that 6. If you look at what Marquise Goodwin does well and what Jakeem Grant does well, if you put it in a Venn diagram, there will be a lot lining up in that middle because they're pretty similar players, undersized, speedy guys. Unfortunately for Jakeem Grant, he's coming off that Achilles injury. We'll have to see how that's affected his speed. If he's lost a step, even with Goodwin gone, if he's lost a step, he's probably gone. But yeah, if we're talking about Schwartz, I thought that there was a decent chance he was going to make the roster outside of what most people thought even before the injury. This kind of makes me feel like he's pretty close to being a lock at this point, unless he has a disaster of a camp. And even then, I don't know. It would have to be pretty bad, but he's not even going to be in a position to give you a disaster of a camp. This one is from user who says, Q, with the preseason finally here, what are your thoughts on how much starters will play during the preseason games? And do you think it's important for Deshaun Watson to get as many reps as possible during those preseason games? Thanks and keep up the great work. The truth is now, I just don't think coaching staffs, by and large, value it. You'll see a couple old school guys like Andy Reid and Bill Belichick keep their starters out there, but in large part, 90% of the league doesn't really give their starting quarterbacks that much time in the preseason. A lot of it's because of injury concern. The other issue is with the elimination of the 4th preseason game, now there's like a 2-week bye, so you're going to be some level of rusty at week 1 anyways. It really don't matter how much you play at that point. And teams are finding alternatives, safer alternatives around having to play preseason games for their quarterbacks, like joint practices. Now, if you're asking me what the Brown situation is going to be, given what I know from what this regime has done in the past, what league trends are, here's my prediction for what will actually happen and who will play during the preseason games this year. Just allow me to get the calendar up, and I'll tell you this. The Hall of Fame game, you'll be lucky to see second stringers. You might see some select second stringers. You'll see some rookies, and you'll see some guys that they think need work. But that's the only people you're really going to see during the first preseason game, the Hall of Fame game. I wouldn't be surprised if it was just Kellen Mond and DTR in that first preseason game. I don't even think you get Josh Dobbs in that preseason game, to be honest with you. Maybe you do, since he's not like that valued of a backup, but you might only get him a little bit. And then that second game versus the Commanders, I think you'll get the starters for about a quarter. And I think that's all you're going to get from the starters because the next preseason game is against the Eagles, but you're doing 2 days of joint practices with the Eagles before that game. You're not getting any starters for that preseason game against the Eagles. And then the last preseason game against Kansas City Chiefs, probably not getting any starters there too. So I would expect really you're only going to see starting players in that first preseason game for maybe 2 or 3 drives. I think it's going to be less about the number of drives and more about the number of plays. So they're probably going to go about 20 plays in that one preseason game. That's going to be their work. And then you're not going to see them again until week 1, at least in the exhibition capacity. So that's what I think is going to happen. If they play more, sure. I just know for a fact they're not playing the Hall of Fame game, and they're definitely not playing that week 3 preseason game versus the Eagles. So those 2 are out. Maybe there's a chance you might put some starters in for that Kansas City Chiefs game, but that's the last preseason game of the year. Traditionally, nobody plays during the last preseason game of the year. So I think you're really only going to see them against the Commanders, if I'm being honest with you. The next question comes from Peak Highlights, who says, hey, Q, do you feel the Browns could go toe-to-toe with the Chiefs in the playoff game? That's impossible to answer right now because I don't know what the Chiefs are going to look like this year. Like, I have a pretty good idea, but I have no idea what the Browns are going to look like. That's something that we can answer a couple weeks down the line in the season. Right now, we're trying to figure out what type of team the Cleveland Browns are going to be, let alone if we can line up with the Chiefs and beat them. So the Browns got a little bit of work to do before they can get there. We'll see how Deshaun Watson goes out there and plays. But if he plays well, if things go to expectation with this team, then yeah, this is a team that can line up with them. Corpse Hoarder says, Q, now that Perion Winfrey is gone, do you feel any more worried about the potential relapse of this defense's problems from last year? Obviously, we now have Jim Schwartz to hopefully iron out some of the problems, but it feels like we're one injury away in the DT room before we can start the cascade effect from D-line. Okay. Calm down. Okay. There's a reason this is different. And it's not just Jim Schwartz. You got to look at the whole defensive line, right? The defensive tackle room, granted, it's not that different. It's Dalvin Tomlinson and the same people from last year minus Perion Winfrey. So you can make the argument it's gotten worse. Well, no, it hasn't gotten worse. My bad. You can make the argument behind Dalvin Tomlinson it's gotten worse. But here's the thing. The issue last year wasn't that the defensive tackle room alone was so bad that it destroyed the whole defense. No, that wasn't what happened last year. What happened last year was that the defensive tackle room sucked. The edge room outside of Myles Garrett was barren. Your linebackers all got injured. And then chaos happened in the back end of this defense with the secondary. You see how a number of things stunk. It wasn't one thing that led to the other. The defensive tackle room being bad didn't lead to the edge room being bad. The edge room being bad didn't lead to the linebackers getting hurt. Like, this is not how that happened. What happened was we lost like 3 linebackers in camp, and then Anthony Walker went down, and then the defensive tackles started to play bad, and then the edges lost Myles, and we couldn't stop the run for a week, and then we finally got Myles back. He was working his way back from injury, but Javion Clowney was disinterested for the whole year, and then the secondary lost their mind. The hope for the Browns defense isn't because the defensive tackle room is better. That's going to save the defense. The hope is that you upgraded the safety room. You changed the defensive coordinator. You upgraded the edge room. You even added a veteran defensive tackle. All of these things matter. You can't just isolate one thing and say, well, that's going to be the domino that tanks it all, because it's never one thing that tanks a defense. It isn't. The defensive tackle room for this team has stunk for years, and we've had good defensive performances. Like, it's not just one thing. It's a combination of things. You could get away with the bad defense. Everybody has a bad position group on every team. We just follow this team so we know which ones are our bad position groups. But every team's going to have weaknesses. One weakness does not make your team to collapse. You know, you're not going to be perfect in every area. So, no, that's not how that's going to go down. This one comes from another user who says, "Hey Q, question number 2 for you. All this narrative and speculation around Nick Chubb leaving after this year. What are your thoughts and opinion on him staying or going? Thanks again for bringing in the content and insight." Here's what I think the analytics people get wrong. And when I say analytics people, the NFL in analytics heavy front offices do not think in large part, or at least the Cleveland Browns. I can speak to the Cleveland Browns. I can't speak to everybody else. I know that Andrew Berry and them don't think so stringently on these things, or so specific on these things like analysts on Twitter do. But here's the thing with Nick Chubb. If he has another great year this year, he's not going anywhere, right? Nick Chubb and other elite running backs have the benefit of the doubt. You're not going to give up on Ezekiel Elliott if you're the Cowboys until you're paying him to play for you and he stinks. You're not going to give up on Derrick Henry if you're the Titans unless you're paying for him to play for you and he stinks. You know what I mean? You will pay for the bad year before you get the bad year. They aren't going to preemptively stink. Well, they aren't going to preemptively assume that Nick Chubb's done. That's what I'm saying. Elite running backs always get that benefit of the doubt. The issue right now is that the upper middle class running backs and the middle class running backs are not anymore. Like the league has just decided even if you're Saquon Barkley, it ain't worth it. It ain't worth it. But if you're Nick Chubb, it's worth it. If you're C-Mac, it's worth it. If you're Derrick Henry, it's worth it. If you are Ezekiel Elliott in his prime, it's worth it. You notice that none of those running backs have issues getting paid. The elite ones don't. And while the landscape for running backs has been grim, Nick Chubb's landscape is kind of different because he's part of the 1% when it comes to running backs. So the truth is that the Browns aren't going to give up on Nick Chubb unless he stinks this year. Like if he stinks this year, they're gonna let him go. But if he has another Nick Chubb year, they'll give him another contract and they'll pay him and keep paying him until he proves to them that he stinks. And at that point, then they'll get rid of him. But you don't have to worry about Nick Chubb till the numbers go down. He's gonna get paid. The next question comes from Obi, who says, talk about how, I hate when people start questions with talk about. Miles is going to benefit from getting pushed up the middle. I get what you're saying here in this question. I really do, that it could be easier to evade Miles if you just step up. I don't think that's the reason Miles' sack production hasn't, skyrocketed to 20. Like stepping up in the pocket, it's a very few quarterbacks have the poise in the pocket and the footwork to be able to do that consistently against elite guys like Myles Garrett. What can help Myles Garrett isn't pressure up the middle. It's pressure, period, right? Because if that pressure is coming from any other side but Myles, naturally, that means you're going to force the quarterback to try to evade that pressure by coming towards Myles Garrett. Or if you get pressure from anywhere on the defensive line, that can slow down the quarterback's decision-making, make him hold on to the ball a little bit more, and allow Myles more time to get there. It does not matter where you get the pressure. It does not matter if the pressure's up the middle or if the pressure's on the other side. As long as it's away from Myles Garrett and it is happening, it benefits Myles Garrett. That's it for all the questions today. Let me know what you think in the comment section down below. Y'all have a great day. Have a good night.